Today, we will dive into the history of Lincoln University. Founded April 29th, 1854. However, we're going to go a little bit before that and give you some more history. On the panel today, we have alumni from Lincoln University, Kim Blaney Bivings, class of 81, Miss Carol Black, class of 1967, Karen Nicholas, class of 1979, Miss Sandy, class of 81, and Miss Sheila Sawyer, class of 1971. These ladies will give you some rich, in-depth history on Lincoln University. I hope you enjoy this presentation. Thank you. My first question, I do have 4 questions. And my first question is, how did Lincoln University come about?
Well, I can start. This is Carol. Even though Lincoln was founded officially in 1854, it began much earlier with a freed slave by the name of James Amos. And he very much wanted to go to college. And of course, you know, back in those days, pre-1854, very few colleges, if any, admitted Black students. And so he came into contact with John Miller Dickey, and apparently was very bright. And John Miller Dickey took him under his wing and began to teach him, and brought in others from Princeton University, where John Miller Dickey had many connections, including the president of Princeton. And they worked with James Amos as well as with his brother, also a freed slave. And Lincoln was founded formally as Ashman Institute in 1854. And it was named for Jehudi Ashman, who was a white missionary. And what his mission was to, through the Colonization Society, to encourage Blacks to return to Africa, since we had been brought here enslaved and in chains, and he felt that one of the solutions was to let us go back home. And so his idea was to train ministers as missionaries, train ministers who would become missionaries to Africa. And Jehudi Ashman was a young Presbyterian minister, and he actually took some students to Liberia at the time. And some of them did become missionaries, but because of the environment, the weather, there were many obstacles, and sort of didn't really catch hold the way that the founders had envisioned. And so it seemed it was far better to grow the university, the college at that time, in Pennsylvania. And strategically, Lincoln is founded where it is because it is in southern Chester County, very near the Maryland border. And that meant if any slaves or freed slaves could get to Pennsylvania, they would be free, and they could attend school. In the beginning, the classes were quite small. You know, it was known at the time as Black Princeton. And that was because the Princeton professors were primarily the teachers. And our students learned, those students at the time were classically trained, and Greek and Latin and mathematics, what now we would call a STEM program. Theirs was STEM and languages. And excuse me. The students were just unbelievably remarkable who graduated. The early students, many of them went on to found other colleges in the South. Lincoln was the only, well, there's some controversy, the only Black HBCU, the only HBCU, I should say, in the North. However, we do have a sister school, in a sense, it's Cheyney University, who is older than Lincoln, but did not begin as a college.
True.
It began as a grammar school. And we always say when Lincoln would play Cheyney that we were playing Cheyney High. Cheyney did become a certified university, I believe was in the, Sheila, you can correct me, I believe was in the 50s or maybe the 30s. But Lincoln was the first, late 30s.
Lincoln was the first university.
Right.
It was the first institution of higher education. It was the first degree granting institution by charter from the Pennsylvania legislature. As Carol said, Cheney, this is always a bone of contention, but the reality is that Cheney, originally called the African Institute, was a school for, I guess, elementary, secondary, and industrial arts. It became ultimately, in the late 1880s, a normal school, which was a 2-year school for teacher certification. It did not become a full-blown chartered university until 1940.
And Lincoln began as a private institution and maintained that status until actually until the 70s, when it became state related. But before that, it began as an all male institution, and that remained until 1954 with the passage of important civil rights litigation. And there were some women who even challenged the fact that they were excluded, could not attend Lincoln University. So to forego the litigation and to admit women, the Board of Trustees at that time decided to admit women. And not that all of the board was happy about it. They reveled in the fact that it was a great male institution with its esteemed history. And I thought maybe women would bring the standards down. Well, just the opposite happened. I love to hear the story that Dr. Keener would tell us. He was a registrar at the time, and he was a German professor when I arrived. And he said the women's applications were absolutely stellar. And he would cry sometimes when he had to put their applications aside and could not admit them. So that the early women, and women to this day, have been extraordinary students and have served Lincoln well.
One of the interesting things I want to speak on at the moment actually is because I was on Facebook, and I think it was the HBCU for Biden page, but they were talking about how some HBCUs have majority of Caucasian people. And I do want to mention that in the mid-50s to late 50s, Lincoln had actually decided that they were going to they were going to recruit among white men. As always throughout its history, Lincoln always needs money. And in order to get that, there was some discussion about whether we were going to let in women or white men. And they decided to let in white men as opposed to women. With the oncoming of the 60s and all of the civil rights activity that was going on, that impacted negatively on the presence of white men. But if you look at the yearbooks from those late 50s, you will see an inordinate amount of white men.
So as far as like the early formation and the establishment of Lincoln, I kind of like where the conversation is going, where it's directing to like when the women kind of came into play at Lincoln, because it shows the changing of the times. When Miss Carol just referenced how a lot of people think that she was one of the first people to go to Lincoln, but it was actually 20 women there before her. How do you think, like, let's talk about that, because coming into a totally male dominated school, that has to be kind of, you know, has to give you some type of apprehension, I guess I would say. And then especially back in those times where, you know, the women's suffrage movement had just basically ended, and we just started to get like our rights to vote and our rights to actually be able to do certain things. What was your first day like?
So we visited Lincoln, and my counselors kept trying to encourage me to stay local and to attend Penn. So I really only applied to 3 schools. After visiting Lincoln, I was head over heels in love. And that was the mid 70s, and the ratio of men to women was definitely in our favor. It was absolutely the place for me to be. I got accepted at Hampton, Lincoln, and Penn. And I said that I still preferred to be at Lincoln. And I didn't know a lot about the history involving Thurgood Marshall or Langston Hughes. But once I got accepted, I absolutely did a lot of homework before I got there. And then on campus, gosh, Dr. Southern in the music department,
Oh my goodness, I loved him.
Dr. Winchester,
Yes,
and Dr.
there's a-
Gadden.
Yeah.
So by the time you finished even your first or second year, if you did not have a wealth of information, and if you did not feel just so overwhelmed and prideful about your heritage, I'm not sure what was wrong with you, but just listening to those 3, in addition to so many others, but those 3, I just remember them just instilling so much knowledge and pride in the history, not of only of Lincoln University, but of African Americans in general.
Lincoln was also one of the routes for the actual the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad, correct?
So I could, I guess, maybe say a little bit about both, but just about the question that you asked in terms of how did Lincoln become my choice. I wish I could flip through the pages of my high school yearbook and it would be starkly obvious. However, my mother is a graduate of an HBCU. She went to Alabama A&M and came from a history of family members who attended the HBCUs in Alabama, of which I think at that time there were like 14. So, you know, there was that influence. My eldest sister went to attended and graduated undergraduate from Spelman. And so when I was making my choices, I had been accepted to Tennessee State as a track scholarship recipient. And so when my mother and I went to visit, I realized at that moment that it was so far away from home. So I said, I talked to my mom. I mean, you know, I'm like the youngest daughter. I'm like, you know, I was that baby that was, you know, mama's hip baby. So I was never really too far away from her.
Where was home, Son?
Actually, I'm originally from New Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of people thought that I was from Philadelphia, but actually my residency in Philadelphia has been in the latter part of my life.
Okay.
But I'm originally a Jersey girl. My parents are from Alabama. My mother and parents both migrated during that Great Migration, and I was actually the first of their 7 children that was born in the North. And I have one younger brother. But after I saw how great the distance was to Tennessee, and my mom was like the whole time in my ear, "Oh, you're not going to be coming home, you know, only at Thanksgiving, or, you know, we'll see you at Christmas." And I was like, I can't do this. So I was talking to my sister, you know, the one who went to Spelman. And I told her, I said, you know, I really long for, you know, a Black college experience, but I'm not sure. And she turned to me and she said, "Have you ever heard of Lincoln?" And that was all it took. I found out, I made it my business to find out about Lincoln. My father had a very close friend who was an alum, actually, and I found this out at the time of my 25th reunion. That was his emeritus reunion. So we had that in common, and I never knew that through all those years.
Wow.
So that's how I landed on Lincoln's campus, and it was instantly in my blood. But what I would also say is, like I said, if you could see my high school yearbook, I graduated from Ben Salem High School in 1977.
Wow.
It was a class of almost 900 students, of which there were 14 Black students.
Mhm.
So I needed to see some of those Black men that they talked about from the history. And of those
With you.
14, of those 14, 9 of them were girls. So, it's like I needed a different environment, a different climate.
Well, I went to an all-girls school, and I was just, like I said, I initially thought that Lincoln was all male. So when I threw out all of my, I got accepted to all of my colleges of choice. And then in my head, I'm going, oh, it's going to be a lot of men there. I'm going to have so much fun. I had no idea I was in for a rude awakening. That was more women on Lincoln's campus.
Right.
And then my freshman year, go ahead, Sheila.
That's one of the biggest myths.
Yeah, heck yeah. But Karen had
Excuse me,
mentioned-
Kim. I do believe that my class, the class of 79, was the first class where the women outnumbered the men. And I think
Wow.
that's when the shift began.
Well, it was a big shift because it was like, I was just really surprised. But you mentioned Dr. Sutherland and Professor Winchester. I called Prof. Sutherland. He taught me Harlem Renaissance. He taught Harlem Renaissance. We called him the Phantom of the Opera because he used to play the organ at midnight, scared the crap out of us. We were, walking around, I'm at Laney, so I could hear this organ playing. It scared the crap out of us. But Dr. Winchester, he taught US history 1945 to the present. I didn't have to take notes at all because he was just that good.
Mhm.
And if I didn't know anything about the civil rights movement, he taught me everything because I personally felt like I lived in a bubble in Baltimore. Everything was supposedly, peaches and cream, and our parents protected us from everything. But Professor Winchester talked about Gil Scott-Heron and the whole the Freedom Riders coming through Lincoln, and I didn't have to take notes at all. I ran into him a couple years back. He was teaching at University of Maryland, and I ran into him in Laurel, Maryland, and in a restaurant. And I said, "Excuse me," I said, "Dr. Winchester," and he said, "Yeah." I said, "Lincoln University, U.S. History, 1945 to the present." I said, I love history. I said, I love history, but you made it even better. I said, I could tell people about the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile War crisis, and everything about the civil rights movement because of him.
You just said something very important. You said that the Freedom Riders came through Lincoln. What do you mean?
Oh,
if anybody can talk about that, please do, because that just piqued my interest.
I have
No
limited knowledge, but because of Route 1, everybody going from north to south had to come that route. And I remember when I was on campus in 1963, watching the buses go by for the March on Washington. I really wanted to go. My mother said, no, you probably go down there and get trampled to death or something. But many came through, and they would stop momentarily and wave. And I didn't have any personal contact with them, but we had students who were on the campus who didn't go. We were just we were honored
Well,
that we could see that.
Professor Winchester told us the story about how they were trying to integrate the Oxford Hotel.
Right, I was going to tell that story. Yeah, go ahead.
And he, they used him. I mean, he was just hilarious, but
Mhm.
he was part of the whole movement. And he said that, you know, some of the students went into the Oxford Hotel to see if they could get a room, and they turned them away. And then he went in and they gave him a key. And he said, you know, he showed everybody his key, and that's when they started boycotting and picketing. And he said that he knew that around 5 o'clock, he said he knew that he was going to see some pickup trucks with some chains on it coming from Rising Sun. And he said he thought he was prepared. He said as soon as the pickup trucks pulled up, he said the next thing you know, he said all he remembers is somebody waking him up, because he had fainted because he was so scared. He had passed out. So that was just pretty funny.
Let me tell you that at the end of that story, there was, of course, a legal action brought to integrate the hotel. And the suit was won, but the owner of the hotel refused to comply with the law. And so John Ware, a very important person, became a Pennsylvania congressman, actually purchased the hotel at that point and opened its doors to everyone.
Who is that? The Ware Center? Is it the same?
Well, not the Ware Center, but right, that's who the Ware Center's named for, John Ware. Yes.
I think that one of the things that we really need to be aware of is that Lincoln, because of its placement where it is in the middle of it was in the middle of some extremely racist mentality. Oxford was never a place where you did not think first that you were not wanted there. You know, as young people in college, you know, you think, so what? I don't care what they think. I know what the law is. I know everything. But they let you know that you weren't exactly their favorite people, even though a lot of things had changed. But Oxford was never particularly friendly during the 60s into at least the mid-70s to Lincoln University and its students. There were always some things that were very telling. But we have to, one of the things that I love about Lincoln is that I love its history. Carol had talked about it before, that Lincoln graduated, you know, a large portion of doctors and lawyers and ministers and teachers and social workers. But Lincoln in its early years was absolutely invaluable to Black people. Not only did it provide a lot of the professional status of Black people, but you had people who did such wondrous things, such important things. I mean, we always talk about Thurgood Marshall, and we don't really realize that this man from Lincoln changed the course of America's history. We talk about Langston Hughes, and Langston Hughes was the first Black poet to actually earn his living on his poetry. A friend of mine brought me a copy of a letter from the Library of Congress that he had written to his friend Countee Cullen when he was a student. And he said to Countee Cullen that Lincoln was the first place that ever he felt like home. And he talked about the fact that, well, the food's not all that great and the dormitories are kind of drafty, but it's home. And I thought that was something that was extremely important. We have, when you look at people who graduated from Lincoln in those early days, some of them were the first. I can't remember his name, but we have doctors who started the first Black hospital in Philadelphia, was started by a graduate of Lincoln University. In the early 1900s, you had, and I can't remember his name, but he was an immunologist. He was the country's leading immunologist. It's absolutely, I find it absolutely amazing that Lincoln has been involved in so much and has not really more recently gotten its actual accolades. It was a phenomenal place. I used to love, although the men treated us bad, I used to love listening to them, upperclassmen, because they always sounded so smart to me.
They were. They were.
Well, I know that, but I mean, it was,
they made sure you knew it. Yes, they said you could tell a Lincoln man, but you can't tell them.
Can't tell them anything. Yeah.
Right.
They could talk about anything. I didn't care what they were talking about. It was just so smart.
It was.
I had come to Lincoln not really thinking that Black men were all that smart. And so it was a revelation to me.
I just looked up that last fact
So
that you
did I.
said, and that was actually, I just looked up that last fact that you said, and that was Nathan Francis Moselle.
And the name of the hospital,
Mossell.
and it was the Frederick Douglass Hospital in Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's it. Mm-hmm.
His
Yes,
daughter
and it says
became-
that in 1871, he enrolled in nearby Lincoln University.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And his hospital became a place not only for patients, but it wasn't simply for Black people only, but be that as it may, it was also a training ground for nurses
Right.
and also for med students to do their internships and residencies, because you'll find out that many Black men had to go outside of the country
Yeah.
for residency. They weren't allowed in many places to be a resident in a white hospital.
So in
So
1973, it merged with Mercy Hospital, and that today is known as Mercy Douglas Hospital in
Absolutely.
Southwest Philadelphia.
And the other
Mhm.
connection with the hospitals is that Lincoln students did their residencies at Providence Hospital in Baltimore.
Mhm.
Since there were, I think every doctor or friends of mine whose fathers were physicians in Baltimore were all Lincoln alum. Because they said that was their next step. Once they, once they went to Lincoln, they would come back and work at Providence Hospital. We also need to, Keisha, note that South Carolina State, Livingstone College, Albany State, and Texas Southern were founded by Lincoln alum.
Mhm. And there have been
Never
a
knew
number
that.
of colleges in Africa
Yes.
that have been founded by Lincoln alum.
Two colleges in Nigeria and I think one in Ghana.
I mean, that sounds right. Mhm. Actually, there should be about 9. There are 9 altogether.
Pretty long list. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Somebody.
It's so funny that, I'm sorry, it's so funny that we just get stuck on the stuff and the names that we know, like Harriet Tubman, Langston Hughes, Thurgood Marshall. But now you guys are opening up a whole nother realm to, ordinary people, but extraordinary people,
Mhm.
because them being an ordinary person to have a Lincoln education have made them become extraordinary by the things that Lincoln University gave them the mind to be able to go forth and do. You understand? So I tell everybody, young and old alike, it's a lot of people I come across nowadays that's like, oh, I don't like Lincoln because of this and because of that. But then I always ask them, but what do you really know about Lincoln University? Because if you're going off of what's being said now or what's being done now, it's like you have no clue. I love Lincoln, and again, you know, my son went there, so my aunt went there, my uncles went there. It's always a place that, like you said, has been home to me,
Mhm.
and I'm appreciative
So
of it.
Keisha,
Really, I
I just
am.
shared this just last night. I was talking with my eldest daughter, who is a double Lincoln alum. She's 06 and 17. And we were just talking about our experiences that led us there. She also graduated from the same high school I graduated as well. So a particular teacher said to her, when she was very, ecstatic, I'm going to Lincoln University and my mom has told me all this history and all her friends and blah, blah, blah. And the teacher turned to her and said, why are you going to Lincoln? To learn how to dance?
Oh,
This
Mhm.
was this is
wow.
Wow.
a black
Wow.
teacher of
Wow.
hers in high school. And
Wow.
and I guess I'm
Lincoln
kind of
isn't even
glad.
known for their dance.
Yeah, I'm glad I just, found this out last night, I'll say. So
Wow. Oh, she just told you last night?
you just told me that last
Because she
night.
knew
Like,
what the repercussions were going to be if she had told you
right,
before.
Oh, you
right.
would
I don't know that he would have
Long
finished his
time ago.
career.
you would have acted like the Wicked Witch of the West going up.
Or right, and marching up to the high school quickly to see that he was relieved of his ability to
And
affect
and
young
that's
people.
another thing that I want to that's another thing that I want to touch on before we go. Um before we go, I just really want to touch on that history is so important to tell our children when they are choosing a college or a university that they are going to go to, because you can go to any school and take any class and learn the information that you need. But what you walk away with when you understand your history and the history of where you actually started from, and where it helps you to get where you're going. I think Aunt Karen and Aunt Kim said that to me the other day. You have to know where you come from to understand where you're going. And since they said it to me the other day, it has been resonating with me for ever since they said it, because again, um and Kim can say this, when Chuck decided to go to Lincoln, we both looked at each other like,
No.
seriously, this is
I
where you want to go?
and
And
I
what he
specific,
said,
well, remember, Keisha, I specifically told him, I said, this has to be your choice. It doesn't have to be
yep,
anything about me. I did like this. I said,
yep.
we just got our football team back. I know you like to play. Our team sucks. So I said, but you have to do it for something other than football. And even with that, Jordan, my daughter, I always told her that it's not, you know, you have to set your own journey. Her father went to Morehouse, and when he would go back for his class reunions, he would inundate her with Spelman things from Spelman. And I said, too much, huh? And she said, yeah. I said, what can we, she would say, mommy, can we just put this away? And he would get so upset. He said, well, she's always up at Lincoln doing something at Lincoln. And I said, but I'm not pushing her to go to Lincoln. This has to be her history. And she decided that George Mason was a better fit for her, but she did not go to an HBCU because, and I hate to hear Black people, our own people put down HBCUs. and say, oh, you don't want to go to a historically Black college, or you don't want to go to Lincoln, because I hear that a lot from our alum, unfortunately, and in her head, I'm fortunate that, as Jordan would say, I understand and I appreciate historically Black colleges. George Mason is a better fit for me and what I want to do. But she said, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to talk to a lot of my friends that need to go to HBCUs, attend HBCUs. And she did.
Lincoln has always been my home, will forever be my home. And I'm glad that it was able to be my son's home as well. Lincoln is very important to me. It actually shaped me to the person that I am today, even without sitting in one class. So to me, that says a lot. And I just thank you all for coming on, especially the last minute, to give a little bit more history about the great Lincoln University that we all love.